All right, so we are on week 3 of the longsword, or not the longsword, Sabre. So kind of planned for today is we're going to go over the guards. I really want us to understand how the guards work as far as, I said this before, and I said it last week. Hutton's guards are called parries. My basic theory right now is Hutton doesn't do stationary guards. He has one. He has his middle. That's right here. It's not cutting anything off, right? And that is a really basic go-to, this is where you're going to start from. But he says that it doesn't protect against anything, which obviously it doesn't, because this is in the middle. There's a lot over here. There's a lot over here. Totally missing, covering my body, right? So with that's terse, right? Yes, that is terse. No, it's not. That's quart. So if I'm parrying with a quart, I'm covering with the line of the blade across my body. If I'm parrying with a terse, I'm covering with that line here. So he doesn't call them guards like we have been, like we think about with longsword, where it's this is a starting position, as much as you have defended a strike, and then you can do something there, so you can riposte from there. So, anybody have any questions on that? It seems to be a basic idea. It seems like people are pretty much getting that, but I just want.
Did you have an updated diagram?
So, yes and no. I have an updated diagram, except the guy that I took it from, inverted a couple of the positions. So he calls terse quart, he calls quart terse. He fixed it. He just sent it to me, but that was a message that I got like 5 minutes ago, so I haven't been able to throw it into the rotation yet.
Fair enough.
Now we can use that diagram. We definitely can look at it. We just have to remember that those two are improperly named. That picture is also missing the 6th, the one where you turn it and it's false edge out here. So, let's start from the top. In fact, let's just go through our terse series. So we have, anytime you're doing terse, it's to the outside. So we have our high terse, which is just up here. We've got our terse, and we've got our low terse. Obviously, you're catching a strike from above, or you're catching something from that higher angle. Here covers a whole lot of things. The lower it goes, the more that you're likely to catch something to the leg. But that's what that is. So there's those three. We have high, terse, low terse. On the other side, we have high quart, and low quart. We have those three. The interesting thing that I've noticed going through this, And I kind of want to, I want to touch on it again this week because I think we touched on it some last week. So with longsword, we have guards. And we have guards that are very specific. This is where you're cutting from. This is where you're starting from. This is what your opponent is doing. But they are a little more, the earlier the source is, the more likely they are to say, these things are the same. So you would, and with longsword, you wouldn't have your posta breve and then this would not be posta breve. Like, well, no, there's some variance there, right? Because this is all kind of the same thing. Sabre, we run into the same thing. When we're looking at Hutton, Hutton gives us all of these guards. He's trying to be as specific as he can. He says, here's your high, here's your regular one, here's your low one. But the difference between this, this, and this are just, it's kind of on a spectrum, right? On this side, it's kind of on a spectrum. The difference, the one that is different actually is the horizontal court. So that's the one that goes over the leg. As you come down here and it's just here. It goes over the leg. So you have your high court, low. I don't know if that's right. Oh. Okay. So when you're getting here, you're from this side and you're just flipping over the leg. But yeah, that's your terse, 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 court, 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 and that horizontal. If we look at the diagram, and I can share the diagram. If we look at this diagram, the two that are in the very middle, you have your medium. We can call it middle if we want. We can call that one, that prime, that first position. We can call that first position. But again, that one is basically, if you look at his feet, they're gathered. It's because this is before you're saluting. So we're here, we're just gonna salute. We're gonna salute the audience. We're gonna salute judges. We're gonna salute everybody. Like, when I was doing Olympic fencing, it got a little silly sometimes. We would start like saluting, oh, here's a judge and here's a judge, and I'm gonna salute everybody in the audience. Like, just got silly. I think that's kind of a relic out of things kind of around Hutton's time. But you're saluting from just from there, and then we're stepping into that medium. So there's your terse and your court. Terse is to the outside. So outside, outside, outside. Court is all towards the inside. Inside, inside, inside. Except that horizontal one, though, which is weird. Okay. So that is those six. St. George's Guard is just up here over the top. And that's just to stop a strike from above. The way that we do that is exactly the same as we have done Guard of the Woman for years, right? Where somebody strikes from above, you catch it here, you let that roll off, you cut to the outside. So we can practice that if we want. But the idea is we're just going from that medium guard, we come up, cut. Here from medium, up, cut. Medium, up, And all we're doing is rolling it off and then cutting to the outside. Questions on that stuff? So let's talk about prime for a second. Prime follows the same line as that quart, but you have your high prime, and that's basically just a high hanger. You have your prime, you have your low prime. So it's all kind of along this same line. Your hand is still, your wrist is still down, right? So you're holding it down this way, and you're just here, here, and here. So that's just a parry to the inside with the point hanging down. So if we went from that medium guard and we wanted to parry in a prime, we just drop the point and bring it across. So we're here, we bring it across here. We're here, we bring it across. We're here, we're going low. Now, I don't like low prime. Reason I don't like low prime is I feel like you can slip the leg as much as anything. So while you're parrying here, with my footwork, it's a whole lot easier from here to parry, or it's a whole lot easier to slip my leg than it is to parry and then be able to do something else. In fact, I would argue that more often than not, if you can slip the leg, you're a lot better off doing it, because if I'm here and I can slip the leg, their blade passes where my leg was, then I can riposte. If I parry with a low prime, I have stopped their strike, but I don't have a lot of, I can bring it in with a false edge. But all I've done here is stopped it, which means when I come off the blade, then I've lost blade contact, and that's a bad idea.
Well, question there. So that cut 3, would the target be the leg, or would it be more like a Sotani and actually aiming more towards hip, lower torso? Because if it's aiming more towards hip or lower torso, then that low prime would make a lot of sense.
So
I think it would at least be the thigh, given that, if I recall, Hutton says similar to Fury, like, and says not to strike below the knee, correct?
Right. I would argue that you probably could. I think it is towards the hip, or at most the thigh. I think Fiore's rule of don't cut below the knee is pretty universal. It's kind of not a smart idea. And yes, you can stop it with a prime, but the other thing that it does, let's see if I can get my camera angled right here. Slipping a leg, I'm not just slipping a leg because my body weight is kind of here in the middle. As I slip the leg, I've moved my torso out. So it kind of depends on how tippy their strike's going to be, right? So to your point, like if they're just hitting you with like just the very end, you might be able to void it by essentially stepping out of the way. Now their cut's missed. Now that cut to the hip is missed because they're just aiming to hit you with, just out here at the end. That being said, if they are, if they're on the foible, but they're this far into the end of the sword with that cut, and that's where it's going to hit you in the torso, it may not make any sense to slip the leg because they're not going to miss because you just step back, because they're still going to hit you. So in that case, absolutely, I mean, at that point in time, absolutely go to a low prime and catch it. We haven't talked about grapples on the sword, but I think there are some things that you could do with that as far as you catch it here, and now you can control that sword, you can control that hand if you wanted. But yeah, it's a good point. You really shouldn't be aiming any strikes at the lower knee or below the knee, because that's kind of a dumb place to be like, oh, I'm just going to hit him in the ankle. Well, you might hit him in the ankle, but they also can really void that, especially if we look at our stance and we go back to that really basic Sabre stance where we're keeping our feet a little more shortened than longsword, and then we're just pulling that leg back because weight isn't 50-50, it's more. He says you keep all your weight on the back foot. I honestly wouldn't go any further than about 70-30, but I mean, you can do whatever you want to do, I guess. I'm not going to tell you can't, but because you can be a 70-30 and just with minor shifts, pull that weight to the back foot. So that covers most of it. High octave. Okay, so from terse, we have our terse. We also have our sixth, which is basically at this point, you're doing the same thing. You're still pairing to that outside, but rather than pairing with the true edge, you're bringing it with the false edge. My only concern with this one is it puts your wrist in a bad position, and I think it's really hard to keep good positioning unless you bring your point offline with that parry that way. You can do it, but it just puts your wrist in a bad position. This honestly may not be as much of a problem with Sabre as it is with longsword. Structure is important, but I would argue that you're less worried about super heavy strikes that are going to break your structure as much as you are, this is a pretty lightweight blade, and you're worried about just making sure that they miss, and then your riposte is quick. Yeah. So that's your sixth. You have your high octave. Again, high octave is one of those really weird. I don't see a whole lot of value in it, but okay, because you are bringing it up this way. It's the same thing as that one version that we have with Guard of the Woman, right? Where you're just pairing it this way. But we can go from medium to this way pretty quick. Right? And then we have low octave, or, well, we have octave, which is just itself. It's just out here. So there's here and there's here. Right?
Isn't that one arch pairing with the false edge there?
Yes, yes, you are pairing with the false edge, and the wrist is turned upwards. So here, you're pairing with the true edge. Down here, you're pairing with the false edge, and the wrist is turned, the fingers are pointed up. And the opposite of this one is that sept, which is over here, and it's the same thing on the other side. So this is where it gets, this is where we've talked about.
I think that one again, aren't you also parrying with the are you pairing with the false edge? I don't think so.
With the sept,
Yeah, kind of.
the sept you're pairing with the true edge.
Yeah.
But so you're pairing with the true edge, but it's essentially on that same line. So if we look at it, with our octave, we're pairing with the false edge here. That sept is just on the other side. So basically you're keeping that the position, the hand position staying the same. You're just pairing with the false edge on this side, you're pairing with the true edge on this side, but it's just opposite sides of the same thing covering that same line. So one is to the outside, one's to the inside. And then you have the octave, which is weird, but.
So I'm just sorry, I'm just looking at the two on that side, and so one of them you're think elbow out, and then the other one is elbow in, but both of them you're rolling it up in true edges when you're on the inside.
Right. So that low prime, you're at your true edge is out, and you're pairing with the true edge. That sept, your true edge is out. It's just a question of whether it's here or here.
Yeah.
But they're very much the same. They're very similar. And what I would argue realistically is if you're looking at these and you're trying to figure out what's the best one to do, figure out what you're fastest at doing. I have a drill that we're going to go over, but we're going to work on going through all of the cuts and all of the parries with minor exception. I'm going to tell you right now, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on first position because I don't care. Starting here and like, all right, cool, that's your salute position. But there is no effective, this is where you're fighting from. It's more of a, oh, this is how I'm going to respect my opponent. I'm just going to salute him. We're not going to spend a lot of time here except to make a cut and move from here through. Right? So questions on that stuff? Cool. Okay, this is the so-called Hinckley Drill. This is totally made up. Doesn't exist. Doesn't exist except it exists now. So what I want everybody to do is we're going to start in our medium guard. You make that first cut. So we're going to cut. And then we're going to parry with a second. That's second? Yes, that is second. Spend way too much time on this. Okay. So again, we're going to cut. Now our hand is down here. We're just going to parry with a second. So that is the hand goes down, and then we come back. And we're back here. We're going to cut. And then we're going to parry with the octave, and then back up. So those first two, we're here. We're going to step forward. We're going to cut. We're going to parry with second. Bring it back up. Cut. Parry octave. Second. Cut. Octave. So just go through those a couple of times. The reason that I came up with this drill and the reason we're going to use this drill is because what I really want us to work on here is getting used to your sword is down here. What are our two options? Which one is the right one for the given circumstances? Either one works because both of them are covering that lower line. But I'm thinking of this more as you have beat their sword out of the way, but maybe you're not in perfect measure. Maybe you can't actually hit them. So you parry, maybe you step back, and then you step forward to cut again. But this is something you can practice over and over and over again. The other thing that I suggest with all of these, and your legs will hate you for it, but do it anyway. Start working on standing in your stance, and as you make that cut, taking ground. So we're here, and rather than just making the cut at this position, you can do it both ways. But I suggest that we start here and we work on that. Okay, I'm going to step forward with the cut, and then I'm going to parry. I'm going to step forward with the cut, I'm going to parry. But work on making that lunge with that cut. It is killing my calves, though. Or killing my thighs, I guess. Everybody feel comfortable with those? Maybe not super comfortable, but more comfortable. Again, it's killing my legs, but that's just telling me that I need to do more. Honestly, what it's telling me is that I need to spend more time here, just with my legs bent, just building up that stability in that practice there. Okay. The next two, and this is going to be very, very similar, and it should be because it's the exact same thing. That first cut is from the right to the left. If we're doing Italian longsword, we call it our fendente, because we're following that Oberhau, that high line. On this side, we're just doing it on the other side. The thing of note here is that in the master partner play that that we get from Hutton, he says that you're cutting at the cheek. So comparing it to a fendente is not a bad thing. So we're here, we're going to cut that second one, and we're going to parry. We're going to cut the second one, we're going to parry. Just those two parries that we have down here. So true edge or false edge. One of them with, well, I guess this one's a little more flat. But that low prime is a little more flat versus true edge. But
I'll say the false edge is a lot easier to transition through. when you're cutting that exact same cut over and over.
False edge one is?
Yeah, because you simply parry out and then come back around with your cut. Whereas if you parry
Yeah.
true edge, then you have to bring your tip back through the inside to cut that same line again.
The idea,
Just from a drill repetition perspective, one is easier than the other.
and the idea with this drill, and I think this got put in the master document, but I'll make sure it gets sent out this week. The idea with this drill is you have parried whatever strike they're making against you. You've defended it, and then you are just making you're covering that line where you have put their blade. So if I am beating their sword aside with that second cut, I'm beating it aside, and then I'm parrying, or I'm beating it aside. Oh, I guess it's on this side. Yeah, it's on that side. Right? From the left to the right. So I should be cutting it, yeah. This way. Okay, questions on those? We feel like that makes sense. Is that easy enough to do? So if you're doing them in tandem, you can make a cut here. You could parry, make a cut here, parry. You could include those first two cuts and just include the two different parries that you're going to do at the completion of those cuts to cover that line. The thing that I want to encourage everybody to work on right now is cover, after you've made your cut, cover that line of attack. This is not just a saber thing. It's 100% a longsword thing too. You shouldn't ever be making a cut and then you totally come off the line after you've landed it. You want to keep that line covered because you want that safe. So if I make a cut from above here and I end up in that short guard with a longsword, I don't want to just come off that sword to do something else. I want to do something that's on that line that's keeping me still protected. And that's exactly what we're doing with a saber, right? So we're making a cut, and then we're parrying in such a way that we're keeping that line. Okay. 3. The good news with all of these, or with most of these, I guess, most of these have 2 actions to counter. The exception is kind of funny when you get to 5, but it's only because there's 3 of them there. And parrying from above, there's, anyway. So for that 3, we're going to cut from below with a true edge, and then we're going to parry in court. Cut from below, parry. Feel like I'm screwed up again, but the idea being that I have these all mixed up, but that's okay. The idea is we're going to cut from below, and then we're going to parry here. This is actually court, which is...
Wouldn't you alternate between court and prime?
Yes. Yeah, and I think I have that wrong here.
I mean, I think I get like the idea behind the drill is like, okay, make the cut, parry to that side, like the
Right.
appropriate parries that you can make and switch back and forth between
Right.
them.
Right. And that's the idea here, right? So we're going to cut from below. We're going to parry here in court. Or cut from below, parry in prime. I guess that's octave there. So let's just make those cuts from below. And then we're going to parry out here, or parry up here. There are 2-point high guards. Well, there's outside, inside, 2-point low guards, so octave and prime, high prime. I thought I had this all right, and I may have screwed it up when I rewrote it again. So we're going to cut, parry, cut, parry. And we do the same thing on the other side. Cut, parry, cut. We're just going to, from here, we're completing that cut, and we're just going to parry. I think these are going to be a little bit harder to reset, but that's okay. We're here. We're going to reset down here to cut.
Where's your shoulder out?
What's that?
So where's your shoulder out pretty quick?
Yeah, that's what I'm finding too. If people want to take a break, we can move it to the next. We can move to 5 and 6, but it's basically the same thing. So if you're looking for a drill, maybe we throw my drill out completely as far as a practice, but the idea, it's less important to me that you know the names and more important to me that you understand the positions.
Gain the muscle memory for the positions.
Right. Because honestly, if I may not know the name of terse, but it doesn't matter because if we're sparring and I parry this way, it doesn't matter whether I know the name of this. It matters that my positioning is right so that I've parried it. In fact, if we boil these down to their bare basics, okay, our 5s and our 6s, it's the same thing. There is always a point up variation and a point down variation. So 6 is weird because it's false edge, so you can throw that in there as a parry to the 5. Honestly, I don't like it as much because I think it puts your wrist in a worse position than it could, but you could bring the point wide so you can cut back in. I'd rather parry it this way and then my point's on line to riposte. But you can also think about it as parrying and bring that point down. So there is a point down, there's a point up. There's a point down, and there's a point up. Point down, point up. Questions on those? I know we haven't spent a lot of time on it, but what I really want us to work on here is that idea of, I don't feel like it's my job today to spend a whole bunch of time just doing drills. But if I can give you the material and you can practice this on your own, you can go, okay, well, I'm going to work on my cuts, my fives. Okay, so I'm going to cut, and then I'm either going to parry, or I'm going to cut, and I'm going to parry. But both of them work. There is a point up variation, there's a point down variation.
So I just have an observation,
Yeah.
perhaps, between the two, between the point down and the point up is, I mean, the point up, I feel like makes a lot of sense for riposting into a thrust.
Right.
The point down feels like it's actually really good for riposting into a cut.
Right. Absolutely. And
as far as where your hands are into position, I mean, I guess if you're going high, right? If you're high here, and then they make this cut to the side, you could do this. You could also do that. I think they're both fairly easy to do from that position.
right.
So I guess maybe it's just whatever you have. I mean, one might be observed.
Yeah, so I think that's a good point. Where one is really good at riposting just straight from there. One makes you go around. I keep going back to not stepping out further than you're comfortable with. And I feel like there is not a, to your point, you there may be a right one and a wrong one for what are you planning to do to follow up. So if you want to thrust, point down is not a good way to do it unless you are point down and then you're lifting it so then you can thrust. The exception being actually high prime. Because high prime, you really are in a position that your point is down. So you're not thrusting necessarily at the face, but you're thrusting down into the body. But I think that's a function of it being it's one of those upper guards. St. George, you're going to end up 100% cutting with. Because there's not a good way as you block it across. There's not a good way for me to block it here and then to thrust here unless I step underneath. Like I could, I guess.
I think it's more viable than you think. It's similar to like an ox or guard of the woman, where you would collect it and then move into that ox-like position. Because if you collect it on the strong and then just turn in your points right in their face,
I guess that's
obviously your other option is collect it, let it come off, and then cut. But if it comes in right at that strong where you can just turn your point in.
Well, and you also may be able to turn your body. So I haven't played with it a lot, but if I catch it here, theoretically I could step in with my trail foot, although this is 100% not what he's talking about. I could step in with my trail foot this way. Now I've outside and I'm thrusting it.
And I think you could very easily collect, turn, and thrust in this way too.
Yeah.
Like if you, without doing a cross step, like you could retreat, turn your body in, and then just step forward with that same foot.
Yeah. And then, so you're catching it. And then, and especially if you're looking at way on their foible against way on your strong, like if they're right up against your guard, totally, like I think you can make it work. Okay, what's standing out to people as far as these guards go? These parries go. We'll call them parries instead of guards. But.
One thing I'm noticing, it also seems some of them are faster than others. Like if you're in your middle, going here would block that incoming cut a lot faster than going here or
Right.
here. So
Right.
I think part of that, which one you use, is going to depend on how fast they're coming in versus because yeah, if they're coming in super quick and you try going like this, you may end up just right on top of their blade, and the cut still hits you
Yeah,
anyway.
and they're already cutting in. Yeah.
Whereas
I think it also,
here's much quicker.
it's like where are you coming from, right? Like where did you end your last cut? Or
Right.
Your last
If they're making 2 cuts in a row from underneath, and let's say they're cutting with that 4th cut, and then they're cutting with that 3rd cut, at that point in time, it doesn't make sense to flip your wrist.
Right. Because if you're already here, then coming here is a lot faster.
Yeah, like that's a whole lot faster, a whole lot easier than here and then turning it.
Right.
Also, I actually did have one observation on kind of in line with that. So where you were talking about like when you're pairing out versus turning over, something I think is, at least from my observation, you probably don't want to let your tip go over into this sort of block. If you're pairing, like let's say to the inside, you probably want to drop the tip down. So your tip has gone down and then you're moving your hand out. Because if somebody's coming in and you do this thing, you're going to go over their sword and then they're just going to come in on the inside. Whereas if you drop the point and I think this is faster. I'd have to pressure test it, but I do think it is faster to drop the point and bring your hand down.
So we're just dropping the point to get there versus bringing it.
Right, rather than dropping your tip over to get to that point. And I think that speeds it up a little bit to the point where, again, it still varies, like based on where you're coming from, what's going to be the most efficient guard to get to. Right. But that's one way, like specifically when you're flipping the point down, I've noticed that is a much faster way to get into those positions.
It's faster, but I don't know that it's as fast as moving from here to here. Like this is really
right.
This is slower, even if I'm just dropping the tip. But that's okay, depending on the situation. If somebody's coming at you and they're just coming at you crazy and they're just swinging super fast, I don't know that you have a lot of time to do much more than quart and terse. In fact, perhaps a silly point, but from DeLon's point, it's 100% faster to cut or to thrust, right? Like that's pretty universal. So it is much faster for me to parry and thrust than it is for me to parry and then cut. And if somebody is coming at me super quick, I don't want to have to take the time to make the cut. I want to end it quick. I want to parry and riposte. Like I want to make this really quick stuff because I don't want to come here and then I'm halfway through my cut and they've just thrust under here where I'm completely unguarded as I make that cut. Okay, other observations? Anything else you guys have noticed? Other than some of this stuff being really rough on the shoulders and rough on the legs. All right.
We need like a cricket sound effect.
I know, right? Okay. So I don't know if I'm going to rewrite that one. I might, but what's more important to me is this understanding of I've made my cut and then I'm covering that line. To the point that we made earlier about doing class, where we're talking about doing long swords some of the month, and then we're talking about doing some other things. To this very same point, I don't want us to get away from this when we're doing our longsword work. So you make a cut, you keep that line covered as you follow up. Whether that is you're here and you've turned your true edge into their blade and then you're cutting with the false edge, or whether that is turning the blade and you're cutting with the true edge, you're still keeping that line covered. More often than not, I don't like the idea of I'm going to leave this line to do something else, because as soon as you leave the line, if they're quick enough, they have an opportunity to do something, and you don't want that to happen. If we did these as just as the Hutton guards, it wouldn't really matter. Okay, Adam, I found this here. To your point, the 3 and the 4, he says cut on the outside of the right knee, on the inside of the right knee. His 5 and 6, he said to the belly or just below the ribs. But I have no reason to believe that your 3 and 4 couldn't be towards the ribs, couldn't be towards the hips, instead of aiming towards just that knee. And especially if you're just aiming for the knee, that's dumb. But you can likely hit it if they're not used to slipping. And one thing I'd love for us to get more practice doing, whether that is with Sabre or that's with longsword, is slipping that leg. So getting in a position where we're fighting and then pull that leg. It's out there, pull the leg. Because there are people who, I don't know a good turn of phrase for this. There are people who win because they're consistently cutting at the legs, because nobody's worrying about the legs. They're only worrying about the heads, and they're keeping everything up here, and they just keep cutting at the legs. It's not a smart strategy, but I've seen people make plenty of cuts to the legs that they're like, oh, well, I didn't worry about my legs because I'm worried about my head. Well, you got to worry about both, but if you can slip the leg and then hit them in the head, that's a whole lot better. Yeah. So Hutton says cut 1 is the left side of the head or the cheek. That's their left, not your left. And then you go back to on guard. Like I said last week, his middle guard is his on guard. So you are in that middle. That is his on guard. And we can call it middle if we want, but that's he uses both terms. Cut 2, right side of the head, and then on guard. Cut 3 diagonally, the inside of the knee, outside of the knee. 5 is cutting to the belly, and 6 is just below the ribs.
That formula doesn't work. Try saying it another way.
What? I don't know what my phone was just doing. Okay. Let's take a minute, grab a drink. I am a little bit parched, and then we will move on to the partner drills. These are going to be a little bit hard to do, but I think we can go through the motions. Unfortunately, the reason they're going to be hard to do is because he has you partnering with somebody. So they make a cut, you parry it a particular way, you make a cut, they parry it a particular way, they make a cut. It's going to be hard to do, but we can move through you've defended it this way, you make your cut. Like, we can make it work. It's just a little bit harder. So I'm going to grab a drink, and we will be back. Okay. All right, I am going to pull something up. So as I said before, this is from the document that Chad pulled together. Unfortunately, this is a great document. Unfortunately, what happens when you look at the book in context is he has the advanced lessons and he has the cuts, but he doesn't show like diagrams as far as how you're pairing it and whatever. So what Chad's done is put it together in a way that you can look at one and then look at a diagram that helps explain and helps understand what they are doing. So let me know if you can, let's see, can everybody see that?
Yep.
Lesson first on cut one, parried by first court and secondly by prime. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to follow the columns. So our first thing that we're going to do is we're going to cut a 1 at the left cheek. They're going to parry court. So they're going to bring it, they're going to stop here, and they're going to cut a 4, and we're going to parry it with a second. So we're going to parry it down. That is right. So the way this is going to work is we're going to cut, and then we're going to parry. Then we're going to cut, and then he says parry high octave. So we're parrying here. Cut, parry low terse. So parry here. Cut, parry quart. I really wish we could do this one together because it makes a lot more sense when you cut, they parry, they cut, you like, but that's okay. So now then we go to the other side. We're just going to start with a parry and then a cut 4. And they're going to cut a 1. We're going to parry with quart. And we're going to cut a 2 over the blade. Parry quart. Cut. What does that one say? 6 under the blade. So parry. And then cut a 6 under their blade. Parry quart. And then thrust in. Good news is with all of these is you can practice you can go through this as much as you want, but I want to do it a few times just to make sure everybody feels comfortable with this first one. So we're going to cut, parry second, cut, parry high octave, cut, parry low terse. What did they cut? Oh, Very low terse. Cut, parry court. In fact, if we flip it all together, because we have parried in court, we are now going to cut a 4. So from here, we're just going to drop that tip be underneath so we can cut that 4. Parry court, cut 2. So we've got here, at this point in time, this is a pivot question. So that parrying that second over the blade, I have parried, let's see if I can do this. I have parried their blade. And now I am going over the blade to make my cut. So they've cut, I've parried, and then I'm making a cut from here. So I may be turning to the false edge so that I can make that second. Does that make sense? So we're parrying it, and then we're just going to cut over the top of their blade. It opens up it gives us an opening that we wouldn't normally have. So because their sword is already here, we're kind of thinking, well, this is a quadrant, this is a section that's cut off, but we've stopped it, and then we're cutting just above their blade on that side. Parry court, cut 6 under the blade. Oh, let's see. I'm not sure how that one will work. I think I'm coming off the blade and then cutting. So I'm cutting underneath. That one's weird. Parry court, and then point in at court. So let's go over that one. Let's do it 2 more times. So I cut a 1, I parry second. Second. I cut 1, I parry high octave. I cut 1, parry low terce. I cut 1, I parry court. I cut 4. I'm going to parry court. I cut a 2, parry court, cut a 6, parry court. If we look at the next page of this, this actually, so the cool part about this PDF is that it gives you these cuts and then what they can be parried with. So cut 1 at the left cheek may be parried in 2 ways according to the position of the sword hand may happen to assume, by court or high prime. Here we have lesson first on cut 1, parried by court, and secondly by prime. So like I said, he goes through a lot of these. I don't want to get too far at these today, but the other thing that Chad has done is he does have some of the explanations here. Terse, turn the hand to terse, raising the point slightly and carrying the hilt a little to the right, edge to the right front, thus receive the cut on the forte. So that terse is just out to the true edge side, or to the outside. One day, when we can all be in the same room and we can practice these, I'd love to go through them all. Because there are quite a few here But let's just go back to that second one. So does everybody kind of understand this format? What I love about it is that this is a way that Hutton has given us this is a drill that you can do, partnered, that 100% is just from, like, it would be very much like, okay, we're writing a drill and we say, okay, you parry it this way. It would be like when we have our regular class and we say, okay, you're going to make this cut and you're going to step into it. You're going to make this cut, you're going to step away from it. And here are the actions that you can do. So if we go down here, why does that feel like that's the same one? It's not. Okay, good. So here we're going to cut one and then parry seconde. We're going to parry seconde because they are cutting a 4. So we're making a cut, they parry it, but then they're cutting underneath, so we're going to block it with a seconde. Make a cut, parry that low terse because they are cutting a 6. The low terse and a low quart are great against 5s and 6s because those 5s and 6s are coming across the middle at the rib or underneath the ribs, kind of at that belly button height. The reason the regular terse wouldn't necessarily work is your hand may be a little bit high, so you're intentionally putting your hand low so that you can cover that line where they're going to cut at the ribs or at the waist. And here. So cut 1, parry seconde. Cut 1, parry low terse. Cut 1, parry quart. Cut 1, parry low quart. Cut 1, parry sept. Then we go back to the patient in this case, who is parrying high prime, and then they're going to cut a 4. So I'm catching it, and then I'm going to cut that 4. Parry high prime, cut 6. So high prime, cut 6. So cut, bring it down and cut across. High prime, cut 1, high prime, cut 5, high prime, cut 3, which is awkward. Actually, what I would suggest is if we look at just the patient in this case, or the student, or this P, basically what we're doing is we're just doing everything we can do from high prime. So we're catching it here, and then we're cutting from underneath. We're catching it here, we're cutting this way. 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 There is one cut that is 100% missing there. Which one is that?
Cut 2.
Cut 2. Why is cut 2 missing? Why don't we parry with a high prime and then cut 2?
That's already where your point is.
Exactly, right?
Yeah. You'd just be cutting into their.
The only way to cut a 2 would be to turn it underneath let's say like, and then it's weird, right? Okay. So we go here. Let's just look at the student stuff. So we're going to parry terse. We're going to cut a 1 over the blade. So we're stopping here, and then we are cutting over their blade. So now we're on the we're turning it. So now we're on the inside. We're cutting over the blade. Here, we're cutting a 4. Ooh. Hopefully not my chair. We're here. We're cutting a 6. We're here. We're cutting a 5 under the blade. We're here. We're thrusting in. 2 is missing in this case. Because I think for the exact same reason. I think that we're running into that same problem, right? We parry and terse, cutting a, no, we do cut a 2, don't we? We do not cut a 2.
Yeah, no 2, no 3.
I think because we're parrying in terse, that makes sense. Kind of. We're here cutting a 2 means that we're turning it over the top here. I can parry and I can have that point forward, and then I can cut that 1 over the top of the blade. I just can't make this work quite as well. I guess I still can make it work. So these are things that are easy enough to do. The other reason that we may be missing 2s on this one is if we look at the master on this one, he's starting with that cut 2. And countering a cut 2 with a cut 2 is silly. If they are cutting here, you don't want to necessarily be following the same line. You want to meet in opposition to it for the most part. Unless you're doing something different. So if we look at the master on that one, we're going to cut a 2, and then we're going to parry high prime. Cut 2, parry second. Cut 2, parry low terce. Cut 2, parry low quart. Cut 2, parry terce. We keep going. I have questions on the general way this is working. I don't know about you guys, but I am hitting a wall. I think it's because I've been swinging around this sword too much. There is something that I wanted to note when we look at this stance. So if we look at this picture, his feet are definitely not 18 inches apart like we're told other places to do. So his stance is a little bit wider, but his structure is still pretty solid. I would also argue that if you're in this stance, I think it would be really, really hard to not have your weight relatively middle. Looking at this, that looks like to me what he's doing. His weight is middle. It's not on his back foot, but. Okay, general thoughts. I feel like we can keep going over these, but I also don't know where people are with things. So check in. How are people feeling about things? I'm trying to keep us away from information overload.
I think that's probably a good number. I do think like having a partner would obviously help with these, but like even just practicing those motions of so I guess one observation here is the focus um, seems to be like on the pupil specifically
Mhm.
and proposing to a particular guard each time, right? So
Right.
you're practicing, okay, what are the cuts that I can do when I'm parrying from this guard? The master is always cutting a fixed cut, if you will, and then using different parries. So it's a good practice of, okay, I'm going to make this same cut multiple times and make these different parries. And then when you're on doing the people side, you're like, okay, I'm parrying the same way every time, but I'm making different cuts each time.
Right.
So I think that it gives you a good kind of way. It's like, okay, in one case, you're focusing on a little bit more on the parry, and in the other case, you're focusing a little bit more on the I guess more varied same attack, more varied defensive. The other one is static defense, varied attacks.
And I feel like what this does, actually for both sides, is it reinforces the idea of if they parry this, if they cut this way, this is how you parry. And we're just working on the parry from. So the next one, we're cutting a 2 and we're parrying 6th. That's all you're doing. They cut, you parry, you make a cut, they do something to counter it.
Right.
But it gets really used to, if they make this cut, this is how you counter it. And
the other thing I was going to say is like, and this is probably fairly obvious, but like if you're using the PDF to practice, look at the lesson, but if go to the next page first and look at what he has to say about the guard that you're using, that you're reposting to each time, and then go back and do the practice. But I think I would recommend like look at the page after first to kind of see what he has to say, then go back practice it, maybe then go back and forth so you can kind of, okay, here's what he has to say, so that I'm going to practice with those things in mind.
right. If we take previous, so if we go back to the first one, let me share this again. So if we look at this first one, he says, cut a 1 at the left cheek. Cut 1 at the left cheek may be parried in 2 ways, according to the position the sword hand may assume, by court or high prime. So the first one we're going through is court. We're just working on all of the iterations from parrying in court. Then we go through, okay, they make that same cut. Now we're going to parry in high prime. That's all we're doing here. If you look at the things here, cut 1, parry high prime. Cut 1, parry high prime. Cut 1, parry high prime. Like, it just, and I think this is 37 pages. I think he gets to the point where I don't know that he covers all of them because it's a little far, but it's easy enough to say, okay, now we're looking here, cut 4, parry second. Cut 4, parry second. Cut 4, parry second. Like, so then we're just worrying about, okay, now doing this cut, I will guess more often than not up here. See if we can find it. Cut 4, seconde. Right? So when we look at the picture and we get down to here, cut 4 is parried by seconde or by octave. So there's only 2 options. That's actually why today we started with these are the cuts and then these are the parries. Because I want you to get used to they're making this cut. This is how you're going to parry it to cover that line. And there we talk about seconde. Here we get cut 4, parry octave, cut 4, parry octave. And then we get to 5. We've got our 5 again, 6, 6. The thing of note, and this is really good here. Vertical cut 7, if given at the head, should be stopped by the head parry formerly known as the St. George. And if given at the right or left shoulder, it may be stopped by in the Italian fashion by a high terce or high court. So St. George is, we want to make sure that it is straight up. Okay. If they are right on that center line, they're straight above your head. You want it straight up. If they deviate at all, if they deviate to one side or the other, you want to parry in high terce or high court. And then, excuse me. There we have that high terce. There we have that high court. Here's the horizontal one. So when he gives us the 7 and the 8, his 7 and 8 are not. His 7 and 8 are never given as these are good continuations. He gives them to you because he thinks somebody might attack you cutting straight above, right? Like a peasant. Mind you, this is Hutton. He's not a peasant, but anyway. So you're just going to block it straight above, and then you're going to do something with it. But the answer, like on all of the previous ones, you never parried terce and then cut a 7, because cutting straight above and cutting straight below is inherently inferior to cutting at enough of an angle that you can do something. Horizontal court. Here we go, the point. And basically, when he's saying the point, in this case, what he's talking about is thrusts. So you're parrying in quart, and then you're thrusting. You're parrying in that high octave. You shouldn't be thrusting from high octave, but. Okay, questions on this stuff. We can do more of these drills, but I don't know about you guys, but I am hitting a wall pretty bad.
I think that's a good point. Overall, like, unless I see that people have questions or things that they want to touch on.
So we have questions, observations, things that people are. Obviously, some of this is going to be harder until we can do it with a partner, and that makes it unfortunately difficult, because it's really hard to practice these without somebody actually making that cut and then you being able to do the thing.
Yeah, well, something I noticed also is because I'm left-handed, it kind of changes the dynamics. If I'm thinking like my partner's also left-handed, then the drill works as is. But if I'm thinking my partner's going to be right-handed, then I have to switch things up as the student role, which is fine. It just complicates it a little more. And it's really hard without a partner to visualize that as well.
I would probably advise treat it entirely as if your partner were left-handed as well. So just something that I know, what he's doing here is he's creating repetition. So it's less about the specific motion, and like these drills are for building muscle memory. So even if you practice it from a left-handed perspective, like it will still build that muscle memory, so you can get used to, okay, these are the parries that I'm using, these are the cuts that I'm using. And I think that will probably still translate fairly well, even if you're actually doing this while sparring.
And I don't remember whether it's Roworth or whether it's Hutton, but somebody actually talks about left-handed fighters.
I think it's Roworth, and I think what I remember reading, and I could be wrong, but what I remember reading is that they basically said just reverse it, like, so think on like the lines instead, like high inside, high outside.
Right. Well, and one thing that he ends up doing, one thing that he ends up saying, and it, like when I read the line, it made me laugh, because he said that left-handers do fine against right-handers because they're used to fighting right-handers. And left-handers have a really hard time with left-handers.
It's true.
And in my Olympic fencing, that was 100% the case, because you're not used to fighting somebody. Like, a left-hander will throw a right-hander off unless they're used to fighting left-handed people. Like, for whatever reason, you think you have it figured out and it's not working, and it's because they're left-handed. Left-handers are totally not used to fighting left-handers because it doesn't happen as often.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
And so right-handers are used to fighting right-handers. They're not used to fighting left-handers. Left-handers are definitely not used to fighting left-handers. So, I don't know. I think when we can meet in person and we can do these, I think we can try it and see. Maybe what it means is that we have to modify the drill. So we have to, your parries are still going to be the same. Like, you're still going to parry in a similar fashion. But you may end up with multiple, okay, these are your openings and these are the things that you can cut from there. I would argue that as a left-hander, things that I take as universal aren't necessarily universal, right? So I take pretty universal, this is my terse. If I'm a left-hander, that actually feels more like a quirk because I'm going across the body. But, you know, which one is it? Well, I don't know. It's a question of if you're parrying to the out or the right or the left, and I don't know.
Yeah, well, and the way I was thinking of it is like, if I'm parrying across my body, then that's a quart, and if I'm parrying to my outside, that's a terse. So I was basically mirroring you, Jordan, or whoever I was watching.
Right, right.
But what that changes then is if they throw their cut one, instead of parrying my quart, if it's lefty versus righty, I would have to parry my terse instead.
Yeah, you'd have to do the opposite.
Or the teacher would have to throw a cut two instead of that cut one, and then I could just follow along with the student part, the same parry quart every time.
Yeah, and I think the optimal thing here is to think, okay, they are making a cut from this, like whether you're left-handed or you're right-handed, they're making a cut from your upper right or your upper left. How do you need to parry that? Well, that's going to be different because I'm used to parrying my outside on the right, you're used to pairing your inside on the right.
Yeah.
That's just a function of handedness. And that's funny because it is more of a thing with single-handed weapons. Because longsword isn't quite the same. Like, you can make some things work very similar ways, but like one-handed weapons, all of a sudden everything gets, I think about, oh well, I'm parrying to the inside, so that's my quart. I'm parrying to the outside, that's my terse. But it's going to be opposite for you. But is it opposite for you? So is by definition the terse to the right, or is it by definition to the left? Yeah, it's. And
yeah, I mean, it's the same motions. It's just different names or however you want to look at it. But yeah, the muscle memory, I mean, it's the same thing like Jack was saying, like build up the muscle memory and then you'll figure it out when you have an opponent's blade there, hopefully.
Right. And as long as they are making the right cut. And so what it might mean is when we do practice this in person, it might mean that we have to take it a little bit slow, and I make this cut and you figure out how you're going to block it and then how you're going to do a similar motion to what it says you're going to do. So,
yeah.
It's a good observation though. Other observations, things people are seeing in it, things people are figuring out.
I think so.
So it seems in Sabre the guards aren't so much held, but you just kind of vary temper for temporary amount of time, just use it to like glance a blow.
Right.
Right? Because it's probably just a more fast-paced form of combat, so that middle is kind of a good neutral point before making your movements.
So I think the thing to point out here is that his guards aren't really guards. And that kind of breaks our heads a little bit, but his guards aren't really guards because they're parries.
All right, yeah.
Right? So
because longsword you have all your different guards, but I guess the motions needed to really transition might take longer for longsword, where at Sabre everything's so quick.
And here is where I'm going to start, because if I have to parry, I need to be able to move quickly to either side.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is from here, I can make that tip move pretty quick, just extending the wrist. So I can be in that middle and I can make that 1 and I can make that 2 and I can make that 3 and I can make that 4, and my hand is kind of staying in that same position. And I'm convinced that that's why he calls them parries specifically. He doesn't call them guards. Because we're thinking about them as being a active defensive action, not a I'm going to hang out in terse and just do whatever. Like, I'm going to hang out here. Because obviously, so there's some advantages. In that middle, I can attack on this side, and I can attack on this side, or I can attack underneath, right? If I'm hanging out over here, where are you going to attack?
Yeah, you're
going to attack on this.
Open, yeah.
You know, you may attack low, you may attack high. You're not going to attack on top of the blade because that's silly. So being in that middle, that has the advantage that you can move quickly to either side. But you don't ever want to just be hanging out here. And I say that with the same warning I give everybody in beginner's class. Don't ever hang out here, except that if you know that you're hanging out here, you know they're going to attack on this side. So you know that you're just going to reflex quick and you're going to cover that other side. But so yeah, it's a good observation, I think. That it is different, and it is a lot more fast paced as far as your motions go. And so,
And with that in Sabre, would they be like after a few, I don't know what to call them, like sequences, I guess, like if they trade a few parries, would they try to be going back to that neutral, or are they just going to keep trying to essentially chain their slashes and parries? And
I don't know that you're ever going to go back to that neutral position, because it should be they've made a cut, you've parried it. You make a cut. They
okay.
Like
So once it starts, it's really just trying to keep yourself protected while just landing
right.
a hit.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Cool. Other observations? Go on, Jack.
I think so. I think
Yeah,
I covered most of it.
yeah. The observations have been made, or ones I
Okay.
had, or I've already made my comments earlier.
Yeah. So for next week, we'll go through more of these. I think next week we're going to focus on primarily this advanced lesson study guide. So if you want something to work on this week, going through these is a good thing, because what you're really working on is they've made a cut, you've parried it the proper way, and then you're doing something. And you're doing all of the things to counter it. You're doing everything you can do, from parrying terse. The other observation that is important here is when he says point terse, what he means is to thrust. So we stop in terse and then we thrust. He doesn't call it thrusting, but all right. Anything else?
Stuff people learned today.
Yeah, talk about what you learned today.
I'll start like honestly, like the drill that we were doing at the beginning is, while and this is something that I think happens even in longsword, but take the positions we have and like that's something I think that could scale well, just to get the muscle memory for those guards. And I think you could very easily do, okay, I'm gonna cut one parry, and you can do just cut one, or you can do cut 1, 2, and then you can kind of basically you can expand that out to just again build muscle memory on cutting and parrying without breaking form each time. And I think that's a good way to remember. Also, that here's all the ways I can parry stuff at this or from this angle.
Right.
So
And I think to that point, we may end up including some of this in longsword as okay, I'm cutting a fendente and you're parrying this way. And then what are things that you can do to get out of measure or to change that perspective and stay safe? Like, I cut a fendente and you stop with, say, window, like, okay, and then what are you going to do from there? So,
right.
I think that there are lessons that we can learn from some of this stuff that we can carry into longsword that should be good.
Well, I know for me, I learned just a lot of different things about what you can do from each different place. You know, how to transition from one parry to the next attack. I'm picking up that quite a bit more.
Yeah, just the practice, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, same for me. It was a lot of just kind of solidifying the parries a little bit more, and then like how to transition from one thing to the next.
Something
Yeah.
that had not struck me until we were going over it today is that all of his counters to the cuts have a point up position and a point down position. And when I break it down that way, it's really easy to look at all of these positions that he has and go, wow, there's a whole lot here, and this is really complicated. But if I can break it down to, okay, what is the parry that is point up? What is the parry that's point down? Or in the case of the lower ones, what is the one where your hand is down? What is the one where your hand is up? Or your fingernails are up, or your palm is up, or the back of your hand is up.
So similar to what, same as Kim and Adam, but also the footwork aspect too. I was trying to make sure that when I made my cuts, I was actually doing more of a lower or thrust. I was doing more of that lunging forward, moving forward, and every time I'd parry, I'd either move back into the neutral or pull my leg all the way back, pull them together. So, and I thought that was a good way to, it was good to put in the footwork with the cuts and get used to that aspect of when you cut, you need, moving out, parrying, moving back, and those motions and that footwork.
And some of that works if you're doing sparring in general. If we're doing like single stick and we're doing it pub rules, you're going to start out close enough that you can hit them. So actually riposting backwards is great because bringing your feet together is fine.
Right.
And that's a way of changing your measure without stepping your back foot off and knocking that bottle over. And like, I don't know. It's definitely different. Cool. So yeah, no class on Thursday. Because of Thanksgiving. So
I was gonna say, Josh, did you have something you learned? And I think you learned.
Yeah, I kind of learned more that there's not really any guards, just parries, and that kind of like what Dwan was saying with footwork, I was transitioning a lot with point all the way back and going back into neutral, then lunging forward and trying to test those three kind of steps. And yeah. So there's similarities, still a lot different from longsword, a lot quicker movements too.
Yeah.
cool. Yeah.
I think not a lot else in the way of announcements. Again, we're just kind of where we're at for now. And yeah, no class on Thursday, but
Everybody have a safe.
go yeah, go eat. Maybe don't end up at large gatherings. Maybe not the best idea, but
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, don't get sick. I really would rather not have any of our students get sick, and let's just not get this. Let's make it through without catching COVID. That would be super killer. So let's do that. Okay. We'll have class on Saturday again, and we'll see you guys next time. Have a great day.
Take care.
See y'all.
You guys.